Focus. There we go. Welcome back to the channel. It's been a while. Again, I keep meaning to be a little more consistent with the channel, but I get easily distracted, and just like that, a few months have passed by, no video's been made. But to make up for that, I'm finally doing a video that everyone has been asking for, which is an editing tutorial. Now, I will issue a fair warning that this video is not going to be how you should edit your own photos. Obviously, everyone has their own style, everyone has their own workflow. This is just personally how I like to post-process my work. And also, this video is not going to be a plug for my presets. I see a lot of photographers making editing tutorials, and their first step is usually to download their presets and apply them and then make adjustments from there. I'm not going to be doing that at all. I have 5 different raw photos I will be working with today, ranging between different subjects, different time of day, different environment. If you would like to take a look at my presets, they will be available on my website at thejuliandoll.com. But anyways, enough yapping, let's get into it. Alright, so as I said, I do have 5 different examples. I have one that's an interior, I have a couple that are outdoor during the day, I have one at nighttime. These are personally some of my favorite photos that I've taken over the years. So just to get started, this is a photo that I took at an In-N-Out a few years ago. I really like the colors in this photo. I love the prominent red, yellow, and blue with a little bit of green in there. Alright, the first thing I usually like to do is adjust my white balance. So for daytime shots, I'll usually go anywhere in between 5500 Kelvin and 7500 Kelvin. Let's try 6500. That looks a little better. It might be a little too warm. Let's bring it a little away from that greenish tint. So now after that, I will usually jump straight into the curves. I like having a little punchy contrast, and I like to bring up the tail end of the blacks here, but also bring the shadows down. Next, I like to mess around with the dynamic range a little bit, so I'll bring down the highlights to about there. I like to bring back a little bit of the details in the highlights if I can. Next, we come to the clarity section. I'll bring up structure a little bit just to add some sharpness into the photo. I never add clarity, I always subtract it just to give it that sort of dreamy, soft feel. And I think that's all the settings I want to adjust for the exposure page. Let's move on to color. Alright, and if you know my work, you know that I love high saturation colors. I will usually always bump up the oranges and reds and blues and sometimes greens as well if it works. So that's exactly what we're gonna do. Let's go to the reds. I like to adjust the hue of the red to a little bit more of an orange tone, bring it up quite a bit. I will usually put the saturation for reds and oranges between 35 and 50, and you can see the saturation slider on the orange isn't really doing much because there's not really much orange in the photo. I'm not going to touch the yellow at all because I think the saturation on that is completely fine. For greens, let's turn that up a little bit just because the leaves are very prominent in this photo. And now for the sky, a lot of people don't really like this, but I personally love it. I love making the sky more of a teal color, so let's just adjust the blues and cyans towards that way. Let's bring that up to 25, and then for blues, let's bring that up quite a bit to about 50. That looks good. Now this is the before and after so far. Now you can see I've made very subtle adjustments, but it does make all the difference in the world. You can see it's just slightly punchier. Alright, and I'm not gonna touch the purple and magenta because there's obviously none of that in this photo. Okay, so now my favorite part, the color balance. This is where you get to add color tint to the shadows, the midtones, and the highlights. In my opinion, this is a very important tool for developing your style. However, a little trick I like to use to add depth to my work is going into the shadow wheel and dragging it down into the blues or purples. You can see this photo has overall warm tones, so I like to add cooler tones to the shadows to create some color contrast. And usually I won't touch midtones or highlights unless I'm trying to do a very specific look. But another little tool I love using in the color balance page is you get these little sliders that affect each area. So we have one for the shadow, one over here for the midtone, and one for the highlight. And you can make the shadows darker or you can make them lighter with it. I usually like to bring it up a little bit just to fade out the blacks a tiny bit. And then for highlight, I'm not going to add any color to it, but I will bring the slider down. Bring it up, it kind of blows it out a little bit, but if you bring it down, it sort of flattens it out. Perfect. Okay, and let's see before and after those color adjustments. That's looking way better. And as you can see, that is most of the work done. Now, I do like to go into the refine tool. This is where you get your sharpening, noise reduction, and film grain. I will just turn the sharpening and noise reduction all the way off. I like my photos looking as natural as it can be. I rarely ever shoot in super high ISOs anyways, and as you can see, I shot in ISO 800, and if we just zoom in with zero noise reduction, there's still zero noise at all. So now for film grain, I just like to add a little bit. By a little bit, I mean like half the amount. Now let's zoom in and see. Yeah, see, it's just a very subtle amount. You barely notice it, but it gives it just a little bit of texture. I just personally personally like to use it because I know there's a little trick when posting. When you're posting your photos online, it will compress your images a little bit. Sometimes the colors or lighting in your photos will cause banding when you post it, and it just looks ugly. Like, no one wants to see that. A little trick I learned is if you add grain into your photo, no matter what photo it is, it will soften up or just completely get rid of that banding. So I'll just always have it on to ensure that I don't get banding whenever I post my photos online. Alright, and honestly, that's about it for our first image. Sometimes I like to go into the lens correction setting, bring up the light fall off, just to get rid of some of that vignetting. And if I'm taking architectural photos, I will do some keystone adjustments just to straighten out the buildings. I don't usually crop my photos, but lately I've been loving the 3:4 aspect ratio to get rid of some of that negative space. So yeah, you can just see that after some minimal adjustments, there is quite a big difference. But yeah, I really like how this looks. Let's move on to another photo. Alright, this is a photo that I took at the Stock Institute in San Diego. The photos that I got here kind of remind me of like a Gary's Mod map, if you know what that is. So like I was saying about like architecture photography, I do like to mess around with the keystone to straighten out the buildings. Usually if I'm lucky, all I have to do is just press the auto straighten up and it'll just straighten out the vertical lines. Let's get back into the process again. The shadows are pretty dark in this photo, so I'm gonna bring up exposure by like that much, and then I'll also bring up brightness. Alright, so for the curve section, there is a very specific look that I'm trying to go for to this photo. So what I like to do is, instead of using the RGB curves, I will go into each one manually and do the usual curves that I would do. And now you can see each color channel has the same exact S curve, and now I will just hop over to Luma, put a point directly in the center, bring up the shadows, and as you can see, it's kind of flattening out the image a little bit, and then I'll just bring down highlights a little bit. There we go. So when I'm trying to create a less punchy image, I will make this sort of opposite S curve. This is a technique that I've been using for a lot of my recent work. Alright, so now I will go back into white balance. I think I'm just gonna do 6500 again. That's like a good neutral number. Now with just those basic adjustments, let's see the before and after again. Now you can see that's already such a big difference in how it looks, but you can see the highlights are still kind of blown out here, so I will bring those down quite a bit, maybe bring down some of the whites. Same thing with the clarity and structure. I will usually have these settings exactly the same on all of my work. Alright, and I think that's it for the exposure page. Time to move on to color again. Now you can see the two standout colors in this photo are orange and blue, so that's mostly what we're going to be working on. Let's just crank that up a little bit. Alright, and now let's move on to cyans and blues. Same thing again, I like to adjust these colors more to the teal side and bring up the saturation a little bit, plus 50 for cyan, for blue to -10 hue, and then let's bring up the saturation again. Let's see before and after. That looks really good already. I am noticing that there is a dust spot on this photo. There's a little bit of dust on my sensor when I took this photo. I'm just gonna use the spot tool to remove it real quick. There we go, and just like that, it's gone. May just want to bring up brightness a little bit again. Alright, and then for color balance, I'm probably just gonna do the same thing again, bring it down to the cooler tones. A very subtle amount though, because anything more than that will just kind of overpower the image, in my opinion. We just want to kind of balance out the shadows to give our image that color contrast that we're looking for. Now let's go to highlights. Again, not going to adjust the color setting, but I will bring down this slider just to bring back that detail again. And once again, turn off all sharpening, turn off all noise reduction, bring grain up a little bit, and there we go. Although I'm not really feeling too excited about this photo, let's just go back and maybe adjust exposure a little bit. Maybe I'll bring down the shadows a tiny bit. I might have just made it a little too flat for my liking. Let's bring up the midtones. There we go. That's looking a little better. I think I could saturate the oranges a little more. That's just personal preference, but I like and boost it up quite a bit, and to me this looks right. That feels complete to me. Let me just bring up the light fall off a little bit just to get rid of some of that vignetting, and there we go. That's photo number 2 completed. Okay, so now let's move on to an interior shot I took. This was taken at the Westin Bonaventure Hotel in downtown LA, and this is honestly one of my favorite places in LA to go to shoot. So alright, to get started with this, first it's a little too warm. Let's bring it down a little bit. Let's bring exposure up too, just so I can kind of see what I'm doing here. It's a little too on the magenta side, so I'm gonna bring that down, brightness up a bit, and then let's go straight to curves. What I'm gonna do is my simple S curve, and then see if I need to make any adjustments from there. Okay, there we go. That's looking a little punchy again, so what I'm gonna do is bring up the shadows a tiny bit, maybe the blacks too, just a little bit. There we go. Same thing again. again for the clarity. It's really not much loss of highlight details, so I'm not gonna mess with this panel at all. And we can see that there's predominantly red and orange hues in this photo, so I'm gonna be mainly working on those. Let's bring up the saturation a little bit just to bring out the red in the couch seating. I'm gonna bring it over to orange again. I'm gonna bring up oranges just a tiny bit, not too much. All right, so now let's go down to color balance. Shadows, I'm gonna do the same thing I usually do, bring it down to a cool tone. I think that's good. Gonna bring up the luminance a little bit. And for this photo, I think I might add in color tones to the midtone and highlights. Let's see how that might look. Gonna make the midtones a little warmer. Let's see how that looks before and after. Yeah, since there is just a reddish tint to the stone architecture in this photo, I'm gonna balance it out by adding just a little bit of green, flatten the highlights a tiny bit. And I think that's looking okay so far. Let me get rid of this vignetting real quick. And then for this, I do want to change the vertical lines. Let's move them up a little bit. Maybe straighten out the shot. Okay, and then I'm just gonna crop in a tiny bit. I might just bring up the color temperature a tiny bit. A little better, a little better. I'm just gonna bring down the mid-tone warmth that I've added. Okay, there we go. That's looking more close to what I like. And same thing, take down all the sharpening, all the noise reduction. Yeah, see, there's, even with no noise reduction, there's still barely any noise. You can see a little bit of color noise here, but when you zoom out and like when you're viewing on a small screen, you won't be able to notice it at all. For this shot, I feel like since it's more kind of cinematic looking, we can add a little harsher, zoom in a bit. Yeah, although actually I'm gonna bring the reds back a little bit from orange and make them more red, saturate it just a tiny bit more. All right, I think that's our photo done. You can see just how far very basic adjustments will get you. Perfect, now we got 2 photos left. Just for fun, let's get into this one. I actually really like how the white balance is already. Actually, I might make it a tad warmer, and it's a little on the green side, so I'm just gonna bump it back up to magenta a little bit. Since this is a little more on the overexposed side, I will bring the exposure down. And I think I want to do the same sort of flat Wes Anderson look with all the different color channels here. So let me just adjust all of them real quick to that S curve. All right, perfect. And then for Luma, we're gonna bring the highlights down again, even out the midtones, and then bring up the shadow detail, and perfect, there we go. Yeah, I'm liking that. All right, and then same thing, clarity, structure. I will bring down the highlights a little bit just to bring back some of that sky detail and some of the detail in the horns here. Perfect. And then brightness up a bit. Main colors we're working with are green, yellow, and orange, so that's what I'm gonna be working on. I'm gonna bring up the saturation of the orange just to make this cow pop a little bit. And let's go to yellows. Let's mess around with the hue. I think we could bring it a little bit over to the warmer side. Normally I would bring it over to green to make it blend in with the foliage. Actually, I think I might do that. I think I might just bring it over to green a little bit. I don't know, I could really go either direction with this. I can make it a little more towards orange to bring out fall tones a little bit, like a little more autumn sort of vibe, or I can make it look more like spring by bringing it over to the green instead. And I kind of like this spring look a little better. I think I'm just gonna bring up saturation a tiny bit, and then green I'm gonna make a little bit deeper. And let's see, just after these color adjustments, the before and after, that's looking way better to me. And then of course my favorite part for the shadow is gonna bring it a little deeper towards purple. I think you can see here the difference. And then for highlights, let me see if I can do anything here. I'm actually kind of okay with how the highlights look right now. I may just bring down the luminance to flatten out the highlight detail again. Yeah, see, so even taking down all the sharpness, I still have a ton of detail here. Barely any noise again, and even that grain setting didn't really do much, except you can kind of see up here in the highlights, but barely noticeable at all. Actually, I am noticing there's a little bit of blue in the sky, so I'm gonna make small adjustments on that, try to make it pop a little bit more. All right, I think that's better. See before and after. All right, I think I may just bring the shadow detail down a little bit. And here we have our 4th photo done. All right, and now for our last image. We have something a little different, conditions I'm not really used to shooting in. This was taken in the parking lot of the Griffith Observatory one night. Obviously my usual editing style isn't going to fit this photo that well, but let's try to get into it. I'm gonna try out that simple S curve again, see if it fits. Okay, already, just the S curve. Let's see the before and after. It's a little too much for my taste. If I bring this up before and after, it's a little better. Actually, something I like to do whenever there are hazy street lamps is I like to bring down the white point just like that so that they blend in seamlessly with the glow. I'm gonna bring up the midtones a little bit and maybe the shadows. Let's see before and after. That's looking better. It still has that dreamy feel, but with just a little more contrast. I'm gonna bring down the white balance just a little bit, and I say only a little bit because I actually really like this warm glow that we have going on. Bring up brightness. Okay, that's good so far. Let's move on to color. And since the prominent color in this photo is like orange and brown, there's really no other colors we'll have to adjust. Let's bring it up a little bit because you can see a little bit of color banding is going on right here. So make it a little warmer, a little more towards red. Let's see what that color is that's kind of banding right there. Is that red? Yeah, so you can see a little red ring kind of show up when I bring it up. So I'm gonna blend that in just a little bit. Bring the reds a little more towards orange. That's looking better. And let's see if there's anything going on with the yellows that I can do. Okay, there's a little bit. I'm gonna bring the yellows a little more towards green just to kind of balance out that warmth. And then probably just desaturate the yellows a tiny bit. It's looking good to me so far. Now, I'd say the biggest step in a photo like this will be color balance, because there's not really much going on with the colors or the lighting in this photo. I can bring the shadow tone down to a cooler tone again, and already that is adding a lot of depth into this image. Let's see before and after. Yeah, so all of the blacks here, all the shadowed areas are having a color contrast now. So now let's see for the highlights. I feel like I might want to do something with this little green tone. I think that looks cool. And then I just want to flatten out the white point again just a little bit. Actually, I'm not going to bring up the shadow point at all. I think the shadows are fine as they are. There is a lot of negative space towards the top region here and a little bit just at the bottom. So I'm going to switch to a 3:4 aspect ratio, bring this down a little bit. There we go. So most of the negative space is gone now. And our main focus is now the subject. Same thing once again. Let's get through this and bring up grain. Now, because this is more of a cinematic scene, I think I may just want to bring grain up a little more, a little higher. Maybe bring down the granularity a little bit. Yeah, it's a little more noticeable than what I would normally do, but I do like how it looks for this scene specifically. Very subtle adjustments, again, perfect. And I think that looks perfect as it is. I don't think I really care to adjust the light fall off, maybe just a little bit, but otherwise the vignette doesn't really matter because our corners are kind of shadowed over anyways. So yeah, I think that's honestly it for this photo. We've got all 5 images adjusted now. Let's just go through one by one. Let's see before and after. That looks great. Before and after, very subtle, but I really like it. This one was probably the most dramatic change out of all of them. Although it's really funny because it feels like the highlight detail here has stayed the same. Like there's really not much change in the tones here, but it's mostly just the shadows that got lifted. And as you can see, there's actually a little bit of color noise in the shadows, so I'm just gonna bring that up the tiniest bit. There we go. But again, from afar you don't really see it, so it doesn't really matter that much. See before and after here. Perfect. Very subtle changes again to the colors and tones, but really makes a difference. And for my favorite photo, this is probably the next most dramatic change out of all of the examples that I've given. Perfect. I really love how these results came out, and honestly the editing style between all of these images, despite the fact that they're shot in different conditions, is relatively the same. For most of them I usually add the same S-curve, usually add the same color tones in the color balance tool. But yeah, that's about it. I know that I said I'm not really making this video for you guys to decide how you want to edit your photos. It's more of just a demonstration of what I like personally. But either way, I hope you guys have taken something away from this video, whether it's a different editing style you want to try or maybe a different color palette. Now you can see I didn't add portraits into here because portraits are not really the majority of the work that I make. But if you guys would like to see my post-processing workflow on my portrait work, please let me know. I would love to make a video on that as well. But yeah guys, that'll be it for this video. Once again, you can find my Lightroom and Capture One presets at my website, thejuliandoll.com. I will have a link in the description for you guys. But yeah, thank you once again for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video.